Hello, welcome to Frivolous Gravitas. Hello, welcome to Frivolous Gravitas, and this week we will be talking about literacy, not dealing with the fact that, not everyone can read, because in our society, most people can read. In fact, the average for the developed countries we looked up right before this was 99.2% literacy. And this does take into account people that, are too far away from a library. This takes into account any, probably any mental disorders or dyslexia or anything like that. And it's still a huge wide margin of people in our society that are able to read. So we're not going to be really looking at, ways that we can get more people to read, because it's almost, it's so ubiquitous in our society that for someone to not be able to read, there must be something that's, keeping them from it, because you can't really get through society today without being able to read. You need to be able to read the descriptions on your icons on your computer. You need to be able to read the signs. There's, a book every time you drive down the road, just waiting on the side, telling you, eat here, come here, buy this thing. It's all our advertisements, all our signage, all our everything has script on it that you have to read. You almost can't get by without reading in these days. Now, that's not to say that everyone can read well. Now, the older generations, especially on my wife's side, probably didn't have as much education as we do. So they can read, but they never really were expected to read on the level that everyone is expected to read nowadays. And so a lot of times you get a lot of people with, grade 3, 4 education, and then they went to work in the field, or they went to work for CN or something, and then, fixed trains or cars for a living. And it wasn't a necessity to read. There wasn't a torrent of words coming at them constantly every day. Read this, read that, do this, do that. And so without trying, we have to read in our day and age. But there's a big but. And the but is that we have this power, and reading is one of our greatest superpowers that we have developed. And if 99% of us in our country, in Canada here, in the United States, famously, Japan has like super high literacy rate. Maybe it still does. When I was a kid, it was known for that, 99.9% or something. Credit to their education system, I guess. But there's a difference between being able to read and actually reading. And for this, Chris is going to lead us through why the nature of this distinction and how this causes maybe issues in our society.
Chris, thank you, Jordan.
No problem.
To start us off, I guess, I want to talk about just like human rights and basic equality and why it's important, because it kind of affects everybody's life, like lifetime life, not just, in the moment, or whether people's ability to spot a good deal on the side of the road or what have you. If we truly believe in equality of opportunity, because no person is born better than another person, we can clearly see the difference in quality of life between people who read even the smallest little bit and people who don't. Then we should be able to reasonably assume literacy plays at least some role in professional success. So just because money makes things easier to quantify as in results in terms of successes and things like that, I'm gonna sort of hinge heavily on the income side of things, not because that's the most important facet to proper literacy, but because it's easiest to measure and compare and contrast between peoples. So income distribution itself is a well-known modern crisis. It's been widely cited and studied, especially recently since the Occupy Wall Street movement. And over the course of a person's life, this amounts to a staggering level of income disparity, which wouldn't be a problem if we're just talking about fancy cars, big houses, tropical vacations, or things that nobody's really entitled to. The problem is education, and for people's kids, that costs money. And access to medication or that people require to live on, or medical services that help them grow effectively so they can learn and be productive and professional workers later on in life. That also means tax revenues and tax base. Same with like stable food and housing. Like all of these bare necessities are they're being removed from people's reach, at least partially due to a reduced personal development offered by reading, because lower income levels are far more correlative to a lack of knowledge or a lack of just reading in general. So whether that's financial literacy, or it's like patronage of the arts, or it's understanding of law, their own civic duties as civilians, all those types of things require some kind of broader scope than oneself. Like they have to understand and be able to manipulate information and data that's received in their day-to-day lives as they go about. And that comes down to comprehension. And what a routine, regular pattern or behavior of literacy helps us with most is comprehension. So it's not about necessarily the thing you're reading when you're reading. It's about the practice of reading so that any other time you receive information, you're processing it really effectively, rather than just taking something at face value for the words that are heard and then misinterpreting it or not understanding or grasping the depth of the communication that's being expressed.
Well, when I read something, it's not like you making a good point there, because when I read something, it's not, someone who isn't accustomed, or they watch too much TV or something, they'll just expect me to just read it and go, oh, I understand everything about this. It's like, no, I have to read it and sit there and think for a minute, and then I can come up with something. It's not like in the movies where, you look at something and go, I know what I need to do. It's like, no, you have to process it, and it's a hard thing. And I do a lot of reading for a living, and it's definitely a skill I had to learn. Now I can read, but I had to learn how to really get into it, to really work with the meat of it and find out what I need and don't need. And it became it's a skill that you have to hone. But the problem, I guess, is getting to that, be able to where you can comprehend it. That's very difficult.
There's a lot of side things at play too, like the discipline of sitting down and making yourself read when you're not able to do it well, or when you don't enjoy it. Like I'm not ashamed to say I struggle with reading a lot, and I always have because of ADHD. And that sort of forced me to say, like, if I am going to put in all this energy and effort into sitting still and making myself read, even though I have to read the same sentence over and over again sometimes, or repeat paragraphs because I missed something, sometimes I'll just skip it and be like, well, if I lost it, whatever, and just move on just to get through the material. But that doesn't mean that because reading is hard that you can't do it. And it doesn't mean because you don't memorize everything that you've read that it's not worth doing. The actual practice is the goal. It's not the end result of having known everything that you've read. It's the practice of reading that makes it easier to know things that you read moving forward in the future.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that people assume reading is that they, you read something, you just know it. It's like, well, after a fashion, like I've read The Count of Monte Cristo, but that doesn't mean I can recite it. I can tell you what it's about. I can go into it, but if I read it again, I'd know it better. And if I read it again, I know it better. It's the same as when you're listening to a song on the radio or on the internet or whatever. You get it, and then you get it again. And anything worth reading you're gonna have to unpack it with time and multiple readings, because there's more to something that's worth reading than just the base, well, I need to know what I need to know from this. And so it's not like in a video game where you read something and you've acquired, crafting skills. It's like, no. That teaches you how to do it. Now you got to practice the actual thing. So
Yeah, so for me, it was because it was hard to read. I forced myself to make sure I only read nonfiction, so that at least I knew for sure that my efforts and energies were best placed for my long-term benefit.
Well, you're practical. It's
yeah.
I had the same thing, but when I was 26, I was just like, I need more data, everything, nonfiction, fiction, and I went out and read everything. Probably the very same reason.
When I was a teenager in high school, I started reading textbooks from the overstock of the bookstores. So you could get like a full 500-page book for $5 or something super cheap. And then you could learn Java programming. No matter how old you are, Java programming doesn't care whether you're a professional developer, university student, or a 13-year-old with a bus pass. Mm-hmm. You can learn anything from a textbook. And even though they're really, really boring and it's dry material, the thing is, every single sentence you force yourself to read is useful. I mean, not literally, but mind the pun.
No. But I think I do want to come back to discipline a bit, but I do have that mirrors my own example, where I that really is a very Chris thing to do. And
pragmatic to a fault.
Well, it is, but that's what you wanted. And even though you just wanted, so I went and got it. It's like, well, it must be nice for you. The rest of us have to use discipline. And for me, I have a similar problem. I've got ADHD, and I can't just sit down and read something. When I went on medication, I remember just grabbing a book and just reading it and reading a couple pages. It's like, do people just do this? And so I it made me, and I went through my entire university degree without any help from these medications, and I was just like, how did I do that? And I guess it was discipline, even though it felt just like work hard at the time.
It felt like torture. Yeah.
But one thing I was doing is I was also going to the bargain bin and finding books that were cheap and stuff like that. But I was doing it with history books because this is what I was interested in. And I thought, okay, fiction. I like fiction. I found value in that. You're going to find, people will find value in whatever they're interested in. And that's important. What do you want to read? Well, it doesn't matter. You need everyone's, I've definitely been asked, what should I read to become better? It's like, well, what do you want to read? Well, first of all, everything. Second of all, what interests you? It's just well, you need to read this book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful Individuals, The Rules of Management, blah, blah, blah. It's I haven't read either of those. And it's just you know what, if that's what you want to read, go read it. But I just thought no, I want to read what I think will make me successful but also what interests me, but I also have to sit down and actually read it. I can't just buy books and put them up and be like, I have 2,000 books and I built a bookshelf and now look how smart I am. Bahaha. And people will come over and be like, oh man, you bought a lot of books. You must be really smart. And I can just act smart. It's no, you have to, read them. And it takes work and effort. And
I think that's really key to point out too. You make a good point there, is that it's not about other people. You're reading for your own benefit. It's not to show other people how smart you are or what you've read or it's so that you can apply it in your day to day, even if that's just using a proper terminology or vocabulary or drawing an inference or some type of analogy to help other people understand things. Mm-hmm. Everybody learns differently. So having a wider array of tools at your disposal to be able to communicate with others most effectively is the hallmark of a great speaker. It's not just somebody who pontificates and speaks well and is verbose in everything they do. It's not about that. It's about being able to relate and cater your ideas directly to your audience in a way that's either novel or something they haven't quite processed in the same way. It offers unique perspectives sometimes. So there's all types of all these external benefits to the way we can represent and express ourselves in our daily lives, whether that's for work or play, or for raising kids, or for comforting somebody who's grieving. Being able to speak in someone else's language is a huge benefit you get from reading anything, whether that's fiction or nonfiction. Just being able to word and phrase things in a way that people can relate to more appropriately, and that you can switch or change up your approach to a concept based on the reactions and responses you're getting from other people, that's the bigger value, in addition to reading comprehension and other things like that. But it does extend further out. It's not just about reading so you get better at reading, so you can read more so that you get better at reading. It's about reading so that you can go about your daily life and actually affect things in the world differently. Your interpersonal relationships are better. You're more help to other people. You can teach better. You can learn better. So it's all those types of benefits that usually aren't articulated very well. At least they weren't to me when I was growing up, because my teachers would always say, just reading is important. Reading is important. You see it on commercials during Saturday morning cartoons. Everybody needs to read. And parents are always just read more, but they don't tell you why.
And I always thought any ad campaign from like the 90s or anything done, like, we need to get kids to read. All right, let's put an ad campaign together. It's just like, well, that's guaranteed to absolutely do nothing. And no one's going to be like, oh, I never thought of that. Wow, I think I'll start reading now. It's like, that does, like, what do they expect kids to do?
But it is better than nothing, because there's going to be those kids that say reading's stupid, and then all the other kids will be like, well, not really. It's common sense that it's not stupid. You know what I mean?
So if you present it in the cringiest manner possible, like,
yeah, I know. It's not well done, but it's better than nothing. So I sort of support the effort.
And it is hard to get people to read, but like putting like Smash Mouth up and telling them they're an all-star for reading, and then having them kids dance around with books. It's just like, everyone in grade 7 is just like, what the heck? Do you even talk to us? And so, but like, the best way to show someone that this stuff is useful is to actually show that it's useful. But kids are hard to get to. That's like, they're going through a lot because they are they're about to go through a lot. They're figuring everything out as it's coming at them. And we know now that, reading is this big boon, and we should have started it earlier, but that's hindsight. So, a lot of, what that is just like, what can we do now? But what has to be done is that we have to not just show them. Well, what's happening, I guess, is you have this culture of, not with a lot of kids these days, but it's not the kids, it's everybody. You have this culture of, there's a couple places where it goes. You have this idea that ignorance is as good as, my ignorance is just as good or better than your knowledge. I have street smarts, or whatever stupid thing people say. It's like, no, street smarts is just people smarts that relates to the street. It's just being intelligent in another arena. Like, you're still an idiot. You're just an idiot on the street.
Yeah, converting grams to ounces is still math.
Yeah. It's so, I always hated when people say that, because it sounded like such a cop-out. It's like, oh, I don't need to go to school, I've got street smarts. It's like, neat, have fun selling drugs. But to me,
street smarts can mean other things. It could be like the way people, like being able to read a person who's trying to deceive you. That to me would be street smarts, right?
Yeah, but that's interpersonal skills. You don't just learn those on the street. Like,
yeah, but that's what I mean. It's not about the street, but interpersonal skills aren't something you generally get from a book.
No.
So that's what I think people mean by street smarts, is things that you don't necessarily learn by being taught them. You learn it by experience.
No, although reading nonfiction definitely affects, like, in my life, when I've read a lot of nonfiction, I've applied it in my life. It's like, oh, and you read one character going about their stuff, and you realize that, maybe I was being an absolute idiot just like this character was, and I should chill out and not make a big deal out of everything. And then, all of a sudden I'm applying these lessons in my entire life, and then I try what alterations I want on my billing, and I find that they have good results, and I was like, oh, okay, that's what I was doing wrong. But getting back to that idea of culture, is that you have this, I'm not saying it's like a cultural thing, like as in like your culture does this. I'm saying it's when we have groups of people in our society in all places, at all levels, that say, oh, I don't need to read, I'm rich. Oh, I don't need to read, that's just what rich people do. Oh, I don't need to read that, I'm not going to school. Oh, I don't need to read, I only need to read stuff within my purview, or I need to read stuff in, I'm not going to read outside of my what do you call that?
Like domain of expertise.
Yeah. Or the people around them are all like, what are you doing reading? You should be, playing with us, or, reading stupid. And you have all this stuff that contributes to, I'm just not going to do it, or I'll do it later, or I'll do it some other time. And so actually sitting down and doing it, all this stuff is getting in the way of sitting down and actually reading. And the problem is that that's exactly what you need to do. You just need to set time aside and do it. So a lot of these literacy programs and comprehension programs are geared towards getting people to just pick up a book and read, and getting people to read. And a lot of what I do when I'm trying to teach literacy and comprehension is to assuage them from thinking that reading is this chore that you need to do. You need to sit down and you need to dissect the book. It's only something you do at school. And I try to do, no, let's read something fun. And when we dissect it, it'll be because we enjoyed the book and not because we were forced to read it. So it's like a lot of times I'll get the student to try and pick the book, but it doesn't always work. And it's an uphill battle. But you have a lot of people who will go with the fact that it's like, well, I'm getting by fine enough without reading. I don't need it. Everything's fine right now. I don't need to pick up a book. And this is, at every age, this is an argument from ignorance, because practicality aside, it is the most, what reading actually is, besides, learning which way to turn on the street, allows you just such a richer life than had you not. Now, a lot of times how do I say this? And I think that comes down to what reading is, like I said.
Part of what I wanted to get into today was talking about the benefits of reading and how it does impact people's lives, because I think a lot of this wasn't explained to me when I was younger, and that's what put me off for the longest time. I mean, luckily,
just said, read books and you'll be cool.
Yeah, exactly. The motivation, I think, is key. And motivating people to read in pragmatic terms, at least people like me, I think is important. And that's what I wanted to sort of talk about today, is sort of describe the pragmatic sense and why we should all pay attention to it, even if practically speaking, that's not necessarily our goal, aim, or function of reading itself. This way of approaching reading might encourage people who otherwise wouldn't read. So I was really lucky when I was young, because I got I worked at McDonald's or whatever when I was 15, and my parents helped me buy a computer, and I saved up money and financed it and paid them back and everything, which is all like a learning program with literacy too, because that's budgeting and it's, learning menus and things like that. But with my computer, one of the first things I did, because I was insomniac, was download audiobooks. And this is back when, there weren't torrents or Kazaa or like sites that you could go to. You literally had to find another person who already had the audiobook and pull it from them.
Yeah, you like right click, save file as, and it's on the browser.
Yeah, but you got to like sneak around about it because it was still copywritten, and not many people were listening to audiobooks, so there weren't as many of them produced either. And they didn't have AI to read out text in like common speech or anything.
Might have been.
So
but
most of the books that I could get my hands on were actually lecture series. And I want to thank the teaching company for that, even though I haven't given them as much money as I probably, not that I could have, but should have. They're worth a lot more than I paid them. We'll put it that way. Yeah, so I want to give them a plug in the podcast. The teaching company is one of my favorite. The Great Courses Plus has been like a life-changing commercial product that they sell. I think everybody who can afford to should definitely support them. And if you can't afford to, knowledge should be free anyway. So take what you will from my comment there.
I remember listening to those lectures on my way to classes to supplement what I was learning in class and to put it in a different perspective, or just have my brain be on a different switch.
Mm-hmm.
And
so there are obviously other factors at play, going back to the income inequality thing and talking about practically speaking. Income inequality in North America, but in the Western world entirely, is a huge problem these days. And I believe, this isn't like fact or proven, but I believe a lot of that has to do with people's literacy. And generally speaking, I think that's because people who read more are more exposed to their options and opportunities, therefore they can grab their options and opportunities, or they can mitigate harm or damages when adverse events do affect them. So that goes down from
well, go on.
That goes down from like parented values to disputes with teachers when you're younger, and thinking for yourself and having that critical ability to analyze and interpret situations directly for yourself rather than being told or dictated prescribed answers or definitions or like interpretations of the world. Rather than having them explicitly told to you what things are, you can better figure out what things are for yourself based on the things that you've read as an exposure to things outside of your body. For instance, politics. Most of us have never been around the world. So to read about other places in the world and other cultures in the world, when you later find out that there are people committing acts of terror, and you think, a lot of people, including like Sam Harris and like educated people in the States and in Canada and in Britain or whatever, they believe that these people have a faith that's premised on violence without any understanding or contemplation of the culture or the reality of a war-torn country, or what it's like to grow up in a civil war, or like the trauma that spans generations. And I mean, I can remember because my teachers had parents who were in the World War. So they really drilled in the horrors of war when we were kids and growing up, because they heard it firsthand from their parents, right? Mm-hmm. But I feel like the way I hear people talking today, and again, it's just my feeling, but the way I hear people talking about like, just go there and kill them all, they'll never be better, just kill all the terrorists. Those are human beings. Those are bodies. And just going there to occupy territory and kill people is not a good solution. It's not that simple. And we learned this in the evacuation of Afghanistan now after 20 years. But for all of those 20 years, we've been hearing people say, just go there and wipe them out, kill them all. We're big and strong and we're right and we're fighting for freedom, without any consideration or compunction whatsoever. That to me is just mind-boggling, and it shouldn't happen. We should learn from our past, and reading about other cultures and other people and other people's traumas and how it affects them in their day-to-day lives, instead of just seeing them as numbers or skin colors, or, being so distant and far away that these people could never be better. Like, I hear people say that Israel and Palestine, the Middle East, has been at war forever. There'll never be peace there. But for hundreds of years, Jews and Arabs used to share the mosques. Like, one would go on Saturday, the other would go on Sunday. They both lived together. Like, it wasn't an issue for the longest time. It's only been the last few decades that there's been war there.
I think there's a lot of, now I don't think reading itself can cure this, because of what do you call that, that logic error that people, self-fulfilling, or I can't remember, but the people will end up reading sorry so what people, if they haven't read anything about it and they're just told, they told something, and then they hear something and it sounds good, they'll believe it, and they'll read. A lot of people will end up only reading to confirm that, and like confirmation bias is what I'm trying to get at. So but when you read, you can get a better sense of it, and the more you read, the more nuanced a sense of it you can get. Now, getting back to people though, because this is all pretty obvious. Now, you talked about income disparity.
Yeah, I was still going to get to it though. I haven't actually got into it yet.
Okay, sorry. Then I'll let you get into that.
Okay.
But so judging on that, but like a lot of people with current events and politics are reading or hearing stuff from just one silo, and then they're just sitting there in their little confirmation bias, reading only one thing over and over and over again. And this is a fault of comprehension. This is also a laziness issue. Yes, I am calling people lazy that sit in their silo. And then that leads to, more just apathy and letting.
But sort of what I was getting at, though, is it feeds a positive feedback loop. So when a teacher has direct knowledge and exposure to the horrors of war, they will teach it to students. And kids like us who don't even listen or pay attention in class will just invariably, by exposure to it, grow up to understand the complicated convolutions of warring countries and warring peoples. So it's just in that same sense that knowledge begets understanding, which begets compassion and resolution. Also, having income by knowledge resources, that wealth also expands exponentially based on how well you know the system, as opposed to how productive you are in the system. That's just the way the world is right now in the Western nations. You could be the most skilled craftsman ever, but even if people are paying 10 times the value of a normal carpenter's work for your mastery and your craft, it's going to be your lawyer who set up your articles of incorporation and files your taxes through your accountants. It's going to be those people with knowledge services that are reaping the most benefit for the least amount of work on their backs, because that's how our system is set up. We have a service economy. So having skills is definitely important, but what's more important, rather than trading hour for dollar for your livelihood, even though you're a master craftsman, rather than trading hour for dollar for your product or service, you can be trading wealth that begets wealth, that begets wealth, because with a knowledge and understanding of the system, you can set up umbrella corporations and save more money and leverage and reinvest your money. And then you're making money off the money you've already made, as opposed to money off the labor and productivity from your craft and skill.
Well, and this relies on ignorance of the population. Those people just get rich doing magic. These people get rich doing law magic, and these people get rich doing bank magic. And like we said with a lot of other things, and this has kind of been one of my motifs for the podcast, is that, reading, you need to demystify these things, and reading is one thing that does that. You read a banking textbook or you read an economics textbook, and all of a sudden it's just like, oh, that's how they're doing that. That's not that hard. But it's the same thing as you read a plumbing textbook and you can fix your kitchen sink now. It's not water magic. And this a lot of times leads to outrage, which is frankly quite useless, but it can also more productively lead to, people actually being like, okay, there's a problem here, we need to deal with it, which is a lot more useful. And that will actually, end up with change. And the more people that are able to engage in, demystifying the world for themselves, I guess, is the more ability that we'll have to not be taken advantage of by people who are just kind of for me, a good example of this, I think, would be when I was moving out of my place in Winnipeg and moving to Edmonton. My landlord was he just claimed authority over rental magic and real estate magic. Then he was just strong arming people into doing what he wanted. And so he's like, oh, you don't know what's going on. You could be liable for all this stuff, blah, 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 blah. You owe me this. And he tried to get me to pay for all the repairs that he wanted to do to the apartment I was leaving. And I was just like, no, I paid a damage deposit. I checked the law. And I saw that this guy was just trying to, scam a few bucks from me. He's like, and he was trying to get labor plus materials to renovate the apartment, plus triple time, because it was Labor Day at the time, because he had new tenants coming in, even though I had found another tenant. So, this guy was a shady guy. And so by understanding, having read what I was legally entitled to do and say as a renter, well, I was able to just sit there and say, no,
Yeah, and those laws are specifically established to protect you from precisely that behavior and activity because it's so prevalent. Because so many businesses and people have attempted to do that to profit off of other people who are less aware of their rights and laws. Like, that's the reason we needed to make it a regulation, is because people were violating other people's rights. They were being abused. So I think you hit a key note there with the vulnerability, because that's pretty much the biggest impediment to somebody's income, is their vulnerability to exploitation. That's like literally the same thing. One person's profiting off the labor and sweat of somebody else, based on their vulnerability and their access to knowledge of their exposure to it. So knowing the system is more rewarding than knowing something useful or productive these days, in terms of income and wealth. Not in all cases, because obviously there's a greater fulfillment and enrichment of life producing something tangible than moving numbers on a screen isn't tangible or rewarding whatsoever. I mean, it's financially rewarding, but it's not materially rewarding in somebody's life.
And one of the other things that, like, and it's just kind of weird and tangential, is that having read all I had read, even in nonfiction, I had realized that not just letting it happen and letting him just kind of walk all over me and not taking the beating, like, he was yelling at me and swearing at me, you breaking my balls. And I just went, yeah, I am. And I found that if I confront him and get into the fight, I'll be better off, because, all these books had been telling me, it's just like, if you lay down, you're going to be walked on. And, because one of the things that reading does, is it shows you the experience of other people. And a lot of times, even with fiction now, I'm not a big fan of biographies. They don't really, for some reason, they just don't resonate. But when you put the truths that you learn into a book, into a work of literature, and this becomes this in fiction, a lot of times you can transfer what one person understands to another. And this seems so freaking obvious, but what you're doing is you're living and learning the lessons of another person that you couldn't possibly exist. Like, we're all learning lessons from, Frodo the Hobbit, even though it didn't happen, it never existed. We're all learning the lessons of, again, here we go with the heroes thing, like that we did last week, is that we're learning these lessons that people who couldn't even have existed have learned. We're transferring these ideas from person to person, even if they're dead. And this is one of the reasons I'm also an archivist, is because I believe that these lessons need to be saved. And if they're nonfiction, the lessons from the people in the past need to be put forward so people can sit down and read them and learn those lessons without having to actually learn them themselves. And this, like you said, with a war, like, the longer we have people telling us about World War II, the longer we have before the next time we screw up and get stupid and do it again. And that's important. But it comes down to simple things like, not letting, the bus driver doesn't like the look of you and says you're not allowed to come on the bus. And you say, tough. And it's just not letting yourself be walked on, knowing what you're capable of. And I think the tragedy here and the problem, and this gets into the disparity, and I'm sorry if I'm mistracking you, is that a lot of people don't believe they deserve this, and a lot of people don't believe they're capable of it. So it's like, I'm not one to read books. I'm just a street sweeper for the rest of my life. What? Just read.
But you can be a street sweeper who reads. That's the thing. It doesn't have to be applicable.
Yeah.
Like, you're still going to benefit from it in so many other ways, like ways that you can help your friends when they're in trouble, or you can uplift somebody else who you come across on the street and get them to, shape up their lives and move on. And like, if you could teach them how to trade stocks, you could make anybody a millionaire, because stock trading is indifferent to who it is, who's actually placing the trades. So like, as long as money dictates education, health, housing, nutrition, so long as money is the basis for which we get to raise our kids with those opportunities, it's important today more than ever to make reading a routine and a behavioral pattern, just to maintain a fair representation and to mitigate our own personal vulnerabilities to exploitation by other, whether that's economic or otherwise. That could be like spousal abuse even, or gaslighting a spouse, or a common law partner taking advantage of the situation. And women who can't leave abusive relationships often have this problem.
Well, you get you read someone like, I don't know, you read some of the Bronte sisters or Jane Austen or something like that, and you're reading about women in avoiding bad relationships or in bad relationships. Looking at you, Heathcliff, although you guys were made for each other. Sorry,
no idea who that is.
Wuthering Heights. He's a character.
Oh, okay.
God, everyone in that book was just terrible. But you learn that you can have these things, and you learn that, maybe just because you are the way you are now, you deserve it. And you learn, there's examples of action. There's examples of self-worth. There's examples of, I don't have to take this, or, oh, wait, this, I remember one book. Here's a better example rather than just me making up hypotheticals.
Well, do you mind if I ask you to table it until I finish the income disparity?
Yeah, let me just get on that. Let me just make a note.
Sorry. I've been trying to get to the opening point was sort of just to talk about how to quantify the differences between literacy and illiteracy. And I want to get to the income disparity thing so that we can at least have a basis point from which to jump off from.
Though, I don't think to get you is I don't think money is actually a bad thing in this equation. I think that literacy allows better opportunities with regard to money, because that's
the equalizer. That's the important factor, is instead of having resources extracted from you when you're already limited in those resources, and for those resources to be required to gain more education and more access to more wealth, it's a feedback loop, and that will perpetually keep people impoverished no matter how hard they work. Well, but literacy is a cure for that.
This goes back to a quote from a couple things ago, where to those that have nothing, everything will be taken, and to those that have everything, everything will be given. And if you give yourself something in the form of knowledge from reading, you will have something, and then you will be given. And it's that simple.
So it's not money that's the problem. I don't ever want to make that. What I'm saying, though, is the way the system is now, the only way to make it better is to play the system that it is now and then change it. And the only way to do that is to get involved actively through knowledge, because we are a knowledge economy. The only way to change the law is to become part of the law, or to lobby against it, or to write draft proposals that change it. You know what I mean? You have to actually engage in the system that we're in order to change it, because that's how it's built and structured.
Well, that's
if it were structured any differently, it would waffle and change with the wind and the tide, and nobody could do anything. You couldn't plan long term if the laws changed every week. They have to be static and structured. So as the way they are now, static and structured, the only way to change it is to know the laws as they are now and follow those protocols and procedures to change the policies that are ineffective in causing income disparity and inequality and access to health and restricting access to health and housing and food and all that kind of stuff. So
no, this is exactly right. And that's well put. So go on. I just wanted to say that it was good.
So there are obviously other factors at play concerning inequality. So I'm not trying to say this is one blanket statement. It's just everything from local peers and culture, as you mentioned before, and race and core values and just genetics and principles, all kinds of things. But what's important to note, though, is that with knowledge and without skill, a simple person can earn exponentially more in their lifetime than a skilled tradesperson who never learned more than their craft. And those types of people are more productive and useful, and they contribute more to society. And we should have a system that promotes them to at least earn as much. I'm not saying they have to be more important than a banker or whatever, but they should at least have the capacity to earn as much as a banker without doing banking. Now, in this system, you can't.
I'm going to make an unpopular assertion here. Okay. And is that if you read and you educate yourself, so you're a bank teller, and you're a bank teller because you have the qualifications of a bank teller, and you make, I don't know what minimum is now. You make $13 an hour. Now the thing is that if you haven't done anything else, other than just do bank telling and, you know, you just kind of go home, you're worth $13 an hour. Someone who sits there and goes home and reads and tries to better himself, you know, even just exercises a bit, maybe, I don't know, they are making themselves worth more. And just because you think you deserve more doesn't mean you actually, that you're actually worth that. And this is kind of goes back to that quote that I used before, is that by reading, you are actually increasing your value with regard to whatever. And it goes like, you work at a paint store and you can talk to the boss about this book you've read because the boss also reads. All of a sudden, you are talking to the boss and you're having a conversation, and he knows that you're now a good guy because you read enough to be able to talk on subjects other than paint. This is adding, I used to work at a paint store, and this is the motion that you use for adding tint to paint. Sorry, no one's going to get that. And so you, all of a sudden, now that you can talk to this guy about some obscure topic, I don't know. It could be anything. Or you show an interest in something beyond, you are seen as someone who's more valuable. And if you show that, you know, I read this thing and now I know how to do this, or now I know how to program a computer, or now I know how to write a paper, and they're like, you can write a paper? I can't write a paper. That's pretty awesome. You should. And so now you're thinking, this guy can read enough to learn a simple skill on his time off. He can read enough to become an assistant manager. He can read enough to do this. You give yourself more value. And now I know everyone's going to go off in their little mushrooms. Okay, that was a dumb analogy. They're going to go off their rockers saying, you're saying some people are worth more than others. Yes, I am. Some
their labor is worth more than
some people's labor and some people's capability is worth more than others. I'm not going to hire a toddler. But if that toddler takes the time and makes themselves better over the course of 20 years, that toddler is going to be, their value in the workforce is going to be worth more. Now, our value changes from situation to situation, but within the workforce, or within the realm of capability in earning, you can make yourself more. And this is why I say, you know, people don't think that they need to deserve it, because a lot of people are holding themselves back, saying, oh, I can't do that. I'm not that smart. Well, have you tried? Well, you know, I don't deserve it because, you know, I'm a bad person. It's like, well, you don't need to be if you know you're a bad person, then it's the first step in changing it. So you can make yourself worth more. And reading is like Chris said, is the equalizer. It's the thing you can do most readily available in order to better yourself. And the thing is that there's mechanisms within society and within technology to allow this, i.e. the libraries. The libraries in Canada are actually phenomenal. Great. Yes, I'm like, yeah. No one goes to them. Well, a lot of people go to them. Actually, every time I go, there's just kids everywhere. And I think that's great. And the internet, like type in, I can't find the book I want. Go into Google, type in the book you want, and then type in PDF and you'll find it. Or go to the Internet Archives.
Yeah, so in keeping with the subject though, with income disparity though, what I was getting at is there are ways that people use the term and apply it, and there are ways to actually interpret it properly. And this is both a good example and it's a good topic for our subject matter today. So like, I'm not suggesting it's effective at all to promote literacy only to Hispanic people in the States because their numbers are the highest rates of illiteracy, because that's not equal. That's not a way of equalizing things in terms of income disparity, even promoting literacy policy. Just to one group because they're the most disparate. The way to equalize is to say, hey, yes, there are less white people who are illiterate than there are Hispanic people. Why is that? Well, maybe white people have, more banners in their neighborhoods saying that reading is good, and there are less in Hispanic. Like, the idea should be to equalize the exposure to those common sense approaches, well, that we deem common sense. to make sure that every community is aware of the same things. It's not to say that we should give preferential treatment to certain Black or Hispanic communities or only target men and not women, because more men are illiterate than there are women illiterate. That doesn't equalize anything, just targeting audiences like that. That's what you do for advertising and marketing. When we're talking about a social structure, a cultural problem, what we need to do is make those same accesses available to everybody. So find out what's effective in those other communities and start applying that to, if they're lacking in a Hispanic or Black community, applying what works in another community to that community. Not simply going out and dumping money at them and saying, hey, we're fixing the problem. That's not equality. That's right. The difference between equal opportunity and equality of outcomes. Nobody's saying that everybody should earn the exact same amount of money just because they deserve it and they're entitled to it. You work harder, you should earn more money.
And but a lot of
there's a baseline though.
Everyone thinks that communities are all homogeneous. Like, well, that neighborhood over there is all Black, and that neighborhood there is all Hispanic, and that neighborhood over there is all white. But if you look at it closer, like, area doesn't define race within a city. Like, I'm in Edmonton, and you go one place to another, it's there's people of every race all over the city. You can't just say, well, this community needs it, so we should put a library there. Well, no, this area of the city shows poorer literacy rates. I don't care who's in it, but this area of the city needs it, not just the people, certain people in it.
Yeah. Like, they're lacking a library. If you ask the people why they don't go to the library and they all say, I'm working too much, I don't have time, I'm not interested, whatever, no amount of marketing is going to push them towards doing it. And anytime that you try and focus your efforts on a segment of a market, or in this case, a segment of a demographic, if we're trying to manipulate it, we lend the risk that people misinterpret our efforts as propaganda, and it might actually cause the exact opposite effect. You might discourage people from it, saying, oh, they're trying to force me to read more because they want me to just swallow everything they have to say. Literacy isn't about believing the things you read. It's about reading enough that you have things to compare to others.
That you make your own decisions as an individual. Yeah,
so you don't just read one tax book. You read 2 tax books and then say, hey, that's not quite the same as the other one. And then maybe you check it. Maybe you read a 3rd book. Like, it's the same with politics. There's no one political ideology that's actually right. If we knew a right political ideology, we'd all just be following it everywhere in the world, and there'd be no problem and no war, no poverty, no nothing. The fact is, there is no right politic. So reading several books on politics, even if they're about the same subject, is still very useful. And it's not useful because you have to memorize.
Wrong.
Yeah. But it's not useful to memorize and regurgitate like they teach you in school. That's the worst way of literacy. That to me is illiterate. If you read something, memorize a sentence, and then answer it on a multiple choice question, you haven't learned dick all.
That's absolutely a pet peeve of mine to a huge degree. A lot of my students think like, oh, well, I just need to memorize what you need to tell me. It's like, no, I need you to think. Like, memorization is not what I want here. Memorization, like, in math class, yes, you do need to memorize the equation. You need to know it cold because you need to apply it. So because, like, you need to know, like, was it over r squared or was it over r cubed? Well, you're going to get the wrong thing. You need to memorize it. But then you need to understand how it works behind the memorization. There's 2 things. There's understanding and, knowledge. But now, if I was to say something like, well, you're just telling us that, we should read, but reading is actually a Western cultural construction made only to reinforce, oppression. And the only thing reading does is reinforce Western domination. You're propagandizing us with the books themselves. Any book is a propagandizing. We need to get rid of them. And I've heard stuff like this. This is not an exaggeration. I've heard this in class, and it can be used as a cop-out, but it can be also used.
That's what Nigeria's biggest terrorist group is named after. Boko Haram. Books are Haram. Right. Like, that's the name of their organization. You're trying to make us read because you want us to believe whatever you have to say. Yeah. Like, people literally do believe that that's propaganda. So no amount of marketing is going to change people's patterns of behaviors of going to the library if they believe you're only telling them that to propaganda.
Well, and this actually shows, like, the inherent power of it. When regimes, when entire governments are afraid of books, like the Nazis burning books, or the
church, the Catholic Church did it for years.
Cambodia, Catholic Church they're still doing it. They're trying, but they're giving up slowly.
And ironically, they have the biggest library in the world.
Yeah, and you get people like in Pol Pot in Cambodia would, they burned all the books, and anyone with glasses was too intellectual, because these people are afraid of reading. They're afraid of what individuals en masse are capable of when they educate themselves the way they want.
And that's what Malcolm X really pushed. That's what he was trying to encourage the Black movement for self-defense. It was about sharpening the mind so you don't get taken advantage of, and then you don't need to use force.
Yeah.
That's the strength and power of knowledge. It's not the power to exploit others that you should be aiming for, or the power to make tons of money just so that you can be powerful yourself and have all the women and nice cars and everything you want. Mm-hmm. You should want that power so that you could teach other impoverished people or single mothers or something how to provide better lives for their families. Not so that everybody's a millionaire, but so people can eat and have health care and have clothes and get educated, because education itself even costs money.
Or even so you can contribute in a way that brings you the meaning into your life. So, you educate yourself, and all of a sudden you're working, and your work itself is benefiting other people without, you become someone who learns how to, you read a bunch of business books, and instead of just transferring one thing to another, you start your own shipping company and write your own books, and you can undercut other people because they hire tax people, and you do your own taxes, and you all of a sudden have this power, and now you're bringing people stuff they need cheaper because you've educated and read enough and to provide this, and all of a sudden you have meaning. Well, yeah, I do my job well.
And you said, it's your defense from vulnerability too. Yeah. So it's not just happiness, it's also prevention from harm, because harm makes you very unhappy. So things like fake news, being manipulated for months of your life, and then electing an idiot president or whatever based on information that you just believe to be true because you don't read very much to have things to compare to. Or when a COVID crisis hits and you don't know, masks are good or not, or who's lying, and about
masks are good, no, they're not. Yes, they are. It's
yeah, but the reason people are susceptible to believe things that they hear is because they don't have any point of reference to the opposite. They don't have any reference for critical thought of what they read. They just assume if something's printed, then it must be true. But like I said, I've published books. I barely passed English class. Any idiot can publish something these days.
I got a 51 on my English thing, and then went on to get a history degree with honors because, I did the work. I sit down and read.
Yeah, and that to me is the biggest part, is reducing harm. Even if reading didn't make you happy and you hate it, and it's energy consumption and all that, but the reduction of harm and impact on your life by others trying to exploit your vulnerability is huge. It's astronomical.
I think what we're trying to say is that it makes you anti-fragile.
Yeah, it really does.
Nassim Taleb's sort of way, is because now we've brought this up before, but anti-fragile is a specific term. It doesn't mean durable, where you can just take punishment. It means that you
don't fall apart.
You don't fall apart when stuff happens. So someone who doesn't exercise is going to be more fragile if I fall from a meter, I'm going to be fine because, I've built myself up. But if someone who,
an old lady, she's fragile. I'm anti-fragile. I'm not durable. It's still going to hurt me, but I'm not going to fall apart. And reading helps you be fragile, because life's going to hit you. But reading will give you more ideas. It's oh man, this is just like that time that Batman did that thing. I can't believe I'm using Batman as an example for action in my life. But guess what? Yeah, reading that comic book became a point of note in your podcast entry 20 years later.
And you will find inspiration. You'll learn lessons from myriads of places. We just brought up Kenshin in our Heroes episode. And we used it to inform our action for 20 years, because we were reading that in high school. And this is just a comic book. It's just a TV show. And
graphic novel.
it's graphic. No, it's pronounced manga.
Manga.
But it's true, and that's why I
really
say
good point,
read
too,
anything. Yeah,
I don't want to even restrict it just to reading. So I'm glad you brought that up, because like the way I would interpret literacy would be in sort of engagement of the arts or of the senses to that exposure from external stimuli and conceptual realizations. Mm-hmm. So in other words, audiobooks are just as valid and useful as reading the exact same book word for word. Yes, and if you're more capable of interpreting and understanding and grasping information auditorially, as I am, you'll get a lot more out of listening to a book than reading it, even though reading is supposedly better. I'm not saying you shouldn't read at all, but I'm saying if it's hard.
On that note, I can attest to this. I have read books on audiobook and then read them on, or like read them, physically and then read them on audiobook. Everyone's like, oh, the interpretation of the reader. No, okay. It's the same. I can attest to this. I've done this multiple times. I get the same, and if not more, by reading an audiobook, because I don't skim, I don't skip. It's just keeps going and I pay attention.
And it might be different for different people too. Yeah.
But I can attest that an audiobook is reading, period.
And I can tell you, the only way I'd ever get through a manual concerning human
critique
understanding.
Of pure reason.
Yeah, critique of pure reason. That's the one.
That's Hume. Yeah, but the critique of pure reason.
The only way I could get through that book is through an audiobook. Nobody can sit and read that book. I don't think it's physically possible for a human being to actually grasp the concepts in that book by reading, because your brain just melts. Like, it is so specific and logically intricate. And like something from 400 pages before will be proven logically in 200 pages and then drawn upon in like some sort of cursory reference like 100 pages later. Like, it's impossible to grasp it the first time. But through an audiobook, because you can do it while you're commuting, you can do it while you're getting ready for work, it takes no time. And so people who don't have time to read really don't appreciate the value of reading 1 page a day. Even if it's not like a whole book every week. Like, I used to think that people who read have to just carry books around and read all the time. It doesn't have to look like you read.
People who carry books around want to be seen carrying books around. This is that same thing. Like, it pisses me off when I was working at Starbucks or when I go into a coffee shop and people are sitting there on their laptops working. And I'm like, how could you work? Now, granted, I understand what you're saying. It's like anybody who could just sit down and read. But there are people that are just like, this is what I like. And it's just like, okay, your brain's wired like that. But at the same time, you working on your screenplay at Starbucks, you're not working on your screenplay. You're not doing.
I wrote my book at Starbucks, so I can't. I wrote an entire book just going to Starbucks once every Sunday.
Yeah,
for 3 hours, and you just went to 3 pages a day.
I went to the library because it was the quietest place I could find. Whenever people were talking, I'd be like, yo, common room's over there. I don't want to hear about your party last night. You get
inspired to like describe movements and gestures when other people are interacting around you. You can describe their clothes or their appearance, or you can make up a character. It's much easier to describe things when you're out in public. Like, especially on a street corner. I used to write, when I was in BC, I used to write outside because I got nicer weather.
I would go for walks and then take notes when I do stuff like that. Because I need to, but this is the thing.
It's going to be different for everybody.
Wired differently. So because you haven't sat down and read, and because these kids, they're never going to read, blah, blah, blah. Well, this is why I say, try audiobooks, try sitting down and reading, try a different genre, try a different author. Just keep trying until you find something that hooks you in. And then go with that.
And even if it's numbers, you might want to read financial reports from like markets and watch like business news. I love BNN and I love Bloomberg. Every single day I listen and watch Bloomberg, and they got podcasts on law and on not just politics and markets, but also like the financial reports, financial literacy. You can learn from the active soap opera and drama that is, like, just this week, what's her name from Theranos? That's Elizabeth Holmes. Her trial is starting. That's going to be widely publicized, and you're going to get legal arguments for and against somebody who completely defrauded a whole bunch of investors, making false claims and accusations. So being able to speculate on her defenses and how viable those defenses might be there could be like an abusive relationship thing. There could be like some trauma in the past. There could be some, oh, well, I didn't know, and play that ignorant card, right? Like there's so many ways that they can approach the defense, but understanding the legal system doesn't mean you necessarily have to sit there and comb through case law and precedent. You can just follow a court drama that's actually happening in the real world and listen to it just on the radio, and you can get as much out of it as if you were reading about it. So literacy to me is just about receiving external expressions from other people and internalizing them conceptually, if that makes sense. So that can be done through music. It could be done through art forms or playing piano and guitar or anything like that. But it's just really obvious in books because that's the most applicable. You can buy a book about a subject and learn about that subject.
I think you do have to sit down though. Like it's like a lot of people just say, "Oh, well, I'm watching this movie and I'm studying." Well, no. It has to be an active process. And you can't just passively do it and say you read the book. Well, okay, what's it about? Well, I don't know. It's like, because I've had a lot of my students will come to class and they will have read the book, but they'll have looked at the words for 3 hours. And that's abysmally sad, because I'm just like, you just wasted 2 hours not reading the book. And so you're wasting your own time. Why not just enjoy the story and come to class with it? Well, no, because I'm supposed to get this and that. It's like, no, the higher level stuff comes after you've read it. You don't sit there and be intelligent the whole time. You don't want to, again, the show of intelligence isn't as important as actually having actively read the thing, because you can come up with your own thing and you might come up with the same in interpretation of it, but you actually have to sit down and actually read it. And this is my contention, I guess, a lot of people who make the show of it, because one thing that I see a lot of people doing is that the reading is something that becomes the end in itself. And this is, again, you're cheating yourself. You have, look at all these books, or you go to Chapters and they say you can buy all these books, but they're all color coded, so you can have a colorful room, or they'll have like fancy covers or something. And yeah, it's nice to have a book with a fancy cover. Honestly, I like books with hard covers because I kind of beat them up when I take them everywhere. So
yeah, it feel nicer in your bag too. They don't bulge into your back or whatever.
Yeah, and so I'll tend to like carry them around, and it's like some of my books get quite beat up, but that's okay because it's but you actually have to actively pay attention to it. It's just like you can listen to a symphony, or you can like pay attention to the symphony. And like, it's like, well, I can't do dishes and do it. It's like, you don't need to think about doing dishes unless there's like knives in front of you.
Or unless you've never done dishes before. But like if you do dishes, in which case
you're learning about doing dishes.
Yeah.
You don't need to
then
read about it.
Focus on that. If you can't do dishes and something else, focus on doing dishes until you can do it bored.
One thing I can't do, and this is kind of an admission, is that I can't do numbers while listening to audiobooks. So, and it's weird. So I can't like punch in my PIN code.
No, that's very common actually.
Yeah. So that's one thing. So I'll pause because I have my earbuds here, and they hook up to my phone, which I have my audiobook app, when I have like 50 audiobooks in here.
That's especially problematic though when the book is quoting numbers and they're referencing comparisons between like percentages or rates of change. Like audiobooks are terrible because you can't use a graph. Anything
with a graph. A lot of times audiobooks will come with PDFs though, and a lot of times an audiobook, I found a lot of, I was listening to one by Jonathan Haidt. He's the U of New York guy who talks about
he's very brilliant actually.
Yeah, he talks like the happiness hypothesis, which is brilliant, and the coddling of the American mind, which was read it. And he's got a lot of graphs in there, but then he'll just say, for this audiobook, see the PDF on page 3, and then you'll go in and be like, but if you're walking, I'll just make a note. Now,
or if you miss it, you miss it. Like, it's usually not critical to the entire book. You know what I mean? Like, it's still worthwhile to listen, even if you don't have the reference material on hand. I honestly never check the PDFs.
I don't either, because I just sit there and I'll like pause it and I'll visualize it and be like, okay, got it. But I want to take an aside because for my own, I want to be a bit selfish here. And make a case for like on nonfiction and history, because Chris is talking a lot about for fiction and history, but mostly nonfiction and history. Chris is talking a lot about very practical stuff. Read the law, read this. Yes, do read that. Read manuals, read nonfiction. Now, I will also make a case for, now, like I said, you should read everything, you should try, but read history, because if you want a story and you want it to apply to your life, history is the closest you're going to get. The stories of everyone throughout history, there's stories about everything and every topic that you can imagine. But these stories are ones that are directly applicable to your life, because these are people that were doing actions and making actions in history that they were dealing with the circumstances that they were dealing with. And you see how people in history dealt with stuff. And a lot of times history is the most tragic story that we have. No story really has come close to the tragedy that is history. And to see where humanity is screwed up, you can avoid a lot of that. And you internalize a lot of these lessons that you learn by reading history. And I can't even get into some of the authors. Good one to start with, I guess, would be Mary Beard, a lot popular historian. But and people ask a lot of times, where do I start? Where do I start in history? Well, start with a thing that you're interested in. Then Google essentially that topic and find the books that are most authoritative on that subject. And this is the best way you can do it, is just go on Wikipedia, go to the further reading and see which ones are quoted the most, or which ones are the most authoritative, and start reading them. And a lot of times you'll get a sense of, who's doing what, because every subject's giant. If you're interested in World War II, well, there's more books written on World War II than were written during World War II. Okay, I'm making that up. I don't know if that's actually true, but it could actually be true. If you include journal articles, it's definitely true.
Even if you just counted self-published authors, that would be true.
Yeah, but start with someone like Richard J. Evans' The Third Reich trilogy. It'll be a good intro. Or focus on a battle you're interested, or focus on a person in history you're interested in, and you learn more. And what I find especially is when people who are starting to read, they'll come to you with this book that they've just read, and they'll just be like, "Oh, you're not going to believe what Winston Churchill did," because it's like this thing is the first time they've actually taken something and learned by themselves, and they're almost so proud of it, and they don't even realize it. And then they read more and more, and so when you get proud of it, and don't dissuade someone from talking about something that they're interested in when they start reading. Allow them to vent a bit, because it's natural for someone when they learn something to want to share it. This is it's the most basic natural instinct, because it's on their head. The gears are turning and they need to accentuate it to somebody. And me and my wife do this all the time. I'll come to her with why did the Assyrians do that? And she'll come to me I don't understand how this medication works. And we'll go at each other because we're figuring it out. Reading isn't just the absorption, it's also the integration, which is, I guess, the comprehension of that information. So if someone comes to you, or your husband comes to you and wants to talk about World War II, let him, to some extent. If you can be okay, I don't care anymore, go read another book about something else, please. But this is doubly so for children. When you have kids and they're reading something that they like, don't snap at them because you only are hearing about Spider-Man, or don't snap at them because they're just so interested in the Wright brothers or something. Encourage that, because it's going to encourage them to just explore more. And this is that culture thing where people are the neighbor kids right now are they keep coming over to me and asking me about stuff, and I just tell them, and they're not used to that because they don't have anything like that at home. So it's almost
especially I think important with kids.
Yes.
And when you see kids every day, if you ask them, what did you learn today? What did you learn today? What did you learn today? They'll feel really excited and motivated to learn something on their own, waiting for you to ask them. Because when you do it regularly and make a behavior or a pattern out of it, they'll be excited to have something to tell a grown or adult that they can teach them. You know what I mean? Let the kids teach you, because that's the best way to promote that type of literacy in kids.
And I'd say also don't be too happy about it. Don't be like, yeah, I'd be like, oh, that's neat. Because kids can definitely see that. And I hated it when I was a kid when people were just like, oh, that's so awesome. And I'm just like, I'm going to kick you in the shin.
Don't patronize me, ass.
Yeah, I hated it. I wanted actual interplay between like, oh, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And I could tell when they were like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'm making dinner here. I don't care. It's like, yeah, but I want to say it. I need to say it. And so, but sometimes it's just kind of like, it's nice to have someone just sitting there listening. And this doesn't go away when you're an adult at all. And I think you should let yourself do it, and you should let others do it, because a lot of times we'll read something and keep everything inside. I got my little shell that I don't let anything out. No, you read and he wants to come out. Because
you notice people have replaced the things that they've read and learned with reality TV or TV shows and sitcoms. Yeah. Rather than recounting something they've learned or taught, they'll say, oh, did you see that on TV when so-and-so did this? Or they'll talk about like Big Brother or some kind of reality competition with who's the best dancer or who sings the most.
Just be like high school, like, you go to a party with like your coworkers, and a lot of times it'll just be like high school, like, oh my God, I can't believe so-and-so did this. It's like,
and that's what they're doing though, is they've replaced that literacy, learning, motivation and spirit and gusto. They've replaced that with something benign and useless like television that's like scripted and completely fake.
Yeah, like when I went over to my father's place recently in early August, he brought out all like the stuff they did when they're reading about their ancestry, and they just brought it out and it's like, hey, let's talk about this. And it's something more to talk about. And that's the other thing that reading does. It's like, it makes you more interesting as a person. Mm-hmm. You have stuff to talk about. And this, like, you get like,
and you develop relationship bonds by having things to talk about. Like with my parents, one of the easiest ways for us to relate is one of us will read something from the newspaper and just say it to the other person, and then we'll all talk about it.
Yeah.
Rather than talking about useless garbage, we can talk about something substantive and get alternate perspectives and interpretations from the same thing. Mm-hmm. So like it broadens your connection with people as well as the world around you that you're talking about.
Well, you do find out who your friends are too, when the one.
Again, another thing social media is good for.
Yeah.
Oh man, like, I didn't know that guy was racist.
Yeah. Man, I didn't know I was racist.
Yeah. That's the worst case scenario. Oh shit, I'm a Nazi?
Apparently. Well, I've been definitely called a Nazi before for the stupidest stuff. But then, I read enough to know that it's like, no, I'm not actually a Nazi. I just have a different opinion, which is allowed. Not one that is not aligned with the Nazis. Thank you very much. Those guys were definitely evil. So another thing in my argument for fiction is what I was going to bring up earlier, is that fiction mirrors your own life. And this happened to me definitely with a book called The Corrections by Franzen. I forget his first name. Here we typing it in. And Jonathan Franzen, in his book The Corrections, in his which was written in 2001, and the book is about a dysfunctional family, which I definitely identify with. And it's all leading up to Christmas dinner. So it starts earlier in the year, and the climax is Christmas dinner, and you see it coming because everyone's just pitting at each other. Everyone's trying to just like deal with the fact that the father and the mother aren't like the best couple in the world, and they just take it out on all their siblings, and everyone hates each other, and they're telling secrets between each other. And it's just like, this sounds like a family I know. And you have these parents who are just the worst people on the planet, and the entire family is kind of it's kind of broken because of it. And it was very hard to read. This is a hard book to read. I find people like Franzen not hard to read as in like it's difficult to read. The prose was actually extremely well put together, and it flowed very easily. But I found it hard to read because it was just too real. And so it told me a lot about my own condition and helped me deal with a lot of the things that I'm going with in my life because of the way that he put down this fiction of this family that didn't exist. And a lot of Franzen's books deal with, terrible families, and the honesty of all the characters really lends itself to how one should deal with their own things. And you can see the thought processes of all the people dealing with the fact that they have this terrible Christmas dinner coming up. But it taught me a lot of how I should deal with my own dysfunctions in my family. And it put me on not just this book, but this book and a lot of others, put me on a path to a more mature approach to my problems. And so even though it's just a story about a dysfunctional family, I got a lot out of it, because now I have this guy who's had these other things that I experiences, and he's transferred them into my head. And so this guy who's probably never even heard of me or never will even hear of me, unless he actually is one of our viewers, has actually touched my life in such a deep way by the mere fact that he seems to have understood the similar problems that I have, and has thought about it to such extent that he can write a book about it. And then that has actually helped me deal with my own troubles. I said that a lot, but...
And I hear a lot of people get that type of benefit from reading too. Like I never did, and that's why I can't read fiction, because it's just so painful to me. I'm blunt, like to a fault I'm blunt. And when I read about a character who just pussyfoots around an issue, it just drives me mental, because I just say it.
Oh, I hate that.
Like to me, it drives me crazy to watch
that,
another character fumble through something I could have fixed in 5 minutes. Then it gets worse and snowballs.
Where it's just like, well, we're going to keep the plot going forward by them just not talking to each other.
Like ever. Breaking Bad is like that. I can't stand the show because he just doesn't do what I would do, and it just frustrates me to no end. Like, just say something, speak up. Don't just stand there and mutter and shake your lip and walk away and say, like,
it's this entire when an entire like episode of something could be solved by the two main characters actually being honest with themselves for half a second.
Yeah, but I get how it resonates with other people. It's just not something that personally relates to me. So I can't, knowing that other people are affected by it doesn't change the way I understand it. But knowing that other people are affected differently by literature is in a sense, literacy on my behalf, because I'm learning from other people something I couldn't fathom otherwise. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's why I don't want to restrict it just to books, but books are just an obvious interpretation of literacy from which we could talk about. But I really want to stress that we're talking about all types of literacy as anything that needs comprehension or abstract reasoning or thought or understanding. Well, and that could be through a story, through music, or it could be through like political treatises or something like that too.
And it doesn't have to be highbrow either, because we have pretensions towards highbrow. But what we're doing now is an evolution of the communication technologies that started with stories around a campfire, and then scrolls, and then books, and then with songs in there, and poems, and then we had like television, which, well, the medium is the message, and the message wasn't that complicated. And now we have books are still one of the most complicated and nuanced forms of technology that we have in order to convey the maximum amount of meaning. Before now we have audiobooks, and we have the technology to democratize this. Now we have podcasts, stuff like this, like we've been talking for over an hour, and we're getting to the meat and the gristle of this as much as we can. But
it takes that much time to delve into it, just right. You know what I mean?
Which is why you sit down and read for a long time. And so what we're doing is we're putting a nuanced thing out there. So a podcast, I listen to podcasts. Well, is it's the extension of this. So whatever you absorb, just make sure it's, substantive, I guess. But it doesn't have to be substantive. It just has to be of quality, because you can have a quality video game teach you something. You can have a quality television program teach you something. Heck, I've brought up some of my favorite programs and what they taught me multiple times in this podcast. And I think it's how much, caloric intake does your media have for your brain? And I think it matters. And
I think what you're getting at is sort of the critical thinking aspect of it. And that's the key component. That's like the digestion. If you don't think critically, you're not digesting anything that you're absorbing. Like, you're not getting nutrition from it, mental nutrition. You need to be critical about what media you absorb, because without it, you're just basically putting on a topical lotion that washes off the next time you shower.
Yeah.
Metaphorically speaking.
And I think the best way to find that is, if you finish reading something, and do you sit there and have to mull it over a bit? Does it actually, what did you learn? Like, did you get anything
that urge
out of it?
To tell people about it?
Or did you just waste an hour of your life? That's an hour of your life you're not getting back. And reading and, encountering media isn't something. We're storytellers as a species. And so you have to spend your time engaging in this storytelling, but you have to do it wisely. And
here's the thing. Oh, sorry.
No.
The only point of data I was going to point out, and I completely forgot to mention it from the onset of our show, but according to Gallup and Pew Research, data shows that about 27% as of 2019, 27% of people haven't read a book in whole or in part on either print, ebook, or audio in the past year. And that, to me, there's economies of scale work really well when you go from absolutely nothing and then an incremental start, because you get a massive benefit from a small amount of exercise if you go from no exercise to a bit of exercise. The same applies to reading. You don't have to read an hour a week and try and put aside all these other events in your life, because an hour could be like a coffee date with somebody, right? If you only read 15 minutes and it takes you 15 minutes to read a whole page, which most people can do in 5 minutes, if you read one page a day, that's a book a year. And that's if you stop everything in your life and sit down and spend 15 minutes a day reading one page when you could read 3. So you could read 3 books a year, just 15 minutes a day. And it's not like people don't have the time. It's that they don't have the motivation to stop what they're doing and apply themselves to it. But I just want to stress, you don't need to spend hours and hours and hours to get a small benefit. You need to spend 15 minutes, a tiny, tiny portion of your day, to get a massive benefit from it. Because we're very myopic humans. We see things in the near term. But when you think about it from your whole life's perspective, after 30 years, you will have read 30 really deeply complex books if you spent 15 minutes a page every day. It's kind of
I keep thinking of Jordan Peterson's idea of what would you be like if you stopped wasting your time? What would you be like in 5 years if you weren't wasting your time? And you think about that, and it's go. And I remember in school, in university, what they would tell us, high school wasn't school, was that, if you take an hour a day and read, or if you read one journal article, was it a month or something, or a journal article a week, or if you take an hour of day reading in your field, in 7 years, you'll be one of the foremost experts in that field in the world. And that is true. He's by the time 7 years have gone, it's I've read everything. In fact, I've started writing on this because you will have read everything. And
that has been my modus operandi for a long time now. And I'm starting to see the benefits. I'm not saying that I'm genius or anything, but the fact that I have barely passed high school and I'm able to communicate at all is evidence that this works. Because I don't spend hours and hours a day reading. I spend maybe an hour a week. But you know what? I do what I'm able to.
But what counts as reading, though?
That's sort of why I say it.
Yeah,
it's many things. So
I finished 3 books last week, and I'm on cue to finish 2 this week, and that's excellent.
I super applaud that.
But like, I'm not going to say, well, what have you done? It's like, well, I'm not going to say that. Like, I'm not, that's me. I'm going to say like, well, someone else is going to have done different stuff. But at the same time, as long as you're moving forward, I can respect you. I might not respect what you're reading. Well, I've read all of Das Kapital. It's like, oh, at least you're reading.
Yeah.
Sort of. But
the biggest benefits we get are the long-term benefits, and the long-term benefits aren't about the actual specific material in question. The long-term benefits are the practice of engagement of critical thought, because that's what extends out into all of your other facets of your life, from teaching and raising kids to helping family members, or being a good friend to somebody, or being a spouse that's compassionate and understanding, or empathizing with your family when you're having one of those crazy Christmas dinners.
And I think there's a danger perceived in reading, because a lot of times, and this goes back to trust, I'm like jiving on what you just said there, is that we have all these people and you can get this power out of it. And 26% of people haven't read a book in the last year, even though they can read. And we have this theory that like, oh, if they start reading, those are the people that would, those are, those farmers. What if they start reading, they're only going to read Nazi stuff? And this comes back down to trust. You have to trust that even if people start reading stupid stuff, eventually they're going to, smarten up and read whatever. And if you think that, if you're afraid of people reading bad stuff, that's the same totalitarian mindset that you're afraid of. It's like, well, they're better off not reading if they're not reading that. Well, no, they're going to come to different conclusions, and you have to trust that they are going to come to conclusions, because the alternative is, well, either they stay not reading, or or you burn their books. And so
for freedom to exist, in order for unique people to exist in a free society, there must necessarily be people who think differently. They have to exist. And it's much better to live in a world where you can contest and argue ideas competently between two people reading different things or interpreting the same thing differently. It's a way better world to have something to discuss productively and meaningfully, even if you have different views on the subject matter that you've read. It's way more valuable than to have them not read at all and then just make up things to believe, and then you've got nothing to discuss. You can't argue with somebody who makes up their premise. There's just nothing to argue. If they're going to say 3 + 3 = 7, then you can say, here's the proof that it doesn't. And they say, I don't believe your proof. Well, what left is there to talk about, right?
Well, and I think that comes from a fact that like a lot of people, like if you're reading a book, you are engaging in truth seeking, and you're automatically acknowledging that there is truth. Something is something. And if you say 3 + 3 = 7, then it doesn't matter if you read or not. Nothing matters, because nothing is true. Therefore, I don't need to read. I can just make it up and go with my feelings. And so arguing with that person is ridiculous and redundant in the first place.
It's futile by definition.
So reading lets you understand what truth there is out there. And I think unless there's anything else, we should.
I did have some more if you're game to keep going.
Yeah, let's go a little further.
Okay, I'll try and speed things up because we are sort of getting a bit long in the tooth. But there's 3 main things I wanted to approach, like specifically for this episode. The first is just addressing the problems that we have, that I see it, that we have with literacy in today. So the problem, I feel, number one, is that we're more obsessed with identity and politics rather than pragmatic solutions. So the end result, or the appearance of an end result, is more important to people than actually fixing a problem or actually coming to a resolution that's congenial between peoples.
Look, I made a poster. I helped.
Yeah, exactly. I'm raising awareness. I don't need to do anything else about homeless people. The homes will just materialize as long as people are aware of them. I'm sorry, but if you walk around downtown, you'll see homeless people. Nobody's unaware of the problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely nobody's unaware. What we're unaware of is the severity and depth of the problem. And if you're not contributing to making people aware of the severity and depth of the problem, or making people aware of how simple it could be to solve, or how cheap or expensive it would be to solve, or other ideas in how to solve it, even if it's not cheap or expensive, whatever, the appearances or the results, the outcomes that they're focused on is actually part of the problem with us not finding resolution. And literacy is one of those cases. So having data that shows that people are illiterate, but like 0.1%, it doesn't show that it's a problem in this country, despite the fact that nobody's reading. Mm-hmm. That to me is a problem. If people are capable of reading, they have access to reading. At one point, we used to recognize as a public, as a culture, as a common sense, we used to recognize that it was a right, it was a privilege and a luxury to be able to be allowed to read and to be able to read. We used to appreciate the fact that we could do it. And we don't anymore culturally. And I say this probably just anecdotally from the people I know and I've seen, but like I've worked around the country and I've worked for years, gone to school for years. Like I've met thousands of people in my lifetime, and I've met literally less than hundreds who read every day. So that's my number one, is the emphasis on the outcome rather than the actual process or protocol or policy that we follow. The second problem with literacy is education for pay, or paywalls and access to science or journal articles or resources to fend off other like poisonous addictions like fake news or scandals, clickbait, that type of thing. When people are exploiting our psychology to prevent us from accessing knowledge, or when people are requiring some kind of pay or there's a gatekeeper to accessing the free press, I think that's a travesty. Like it's an absolute travesty. It's the worst thing our country could do for the future population of not just our country, but the species, to restrict people's access to knowledge. It just shouldn't happen. I understand making people pay for a medium like a book because it costs money to print a book, but like libraries are there specifically for that. And there are libraries receive tons of book donations every year. So a library is a solution to this type of problem. But the fact that it's so prevalent now for even like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or Globe and Mail to paywall consistent news and journalism, I think is terrible. It's the worst thing you can do to an education society is prevent people from educating themselves.
Yeah, the reason I don't read the Globe and Mail isn't because I don't follow the Globe and Mail's politics. It's because I can't read the Globe and Mail.
Exactly.
Well, it's like, well, you won't read the Globe and Mail. It's like, yeah, but I can read three other Canadian papers. Like the National Post isn't behind a paywall, and there's other liberal papers that aren't behind paywalls. Like, I'm not going to pay for... We
should want to read disparate opinions too. Like, I want to read stuff I don't believe in, but I can't because they want to charge for it, and I can't afford to get access to all of these different sources. I might be able to afford one, but that's an echo chamber, right? Like that's not expanding my awareness of other points of view.
Now, on an aside, the medium of newspaper is dying because it's not as efficient as other mediums that are popping up right now to convey news.
Well, newsprint on the web is the same thing.
It is.
You don't need a physical piece of paper to buy.
That's also dying. I think a lot of...
well, it's bigger than ever.
Well, it's
because of these paywalls and stuff. They have less overhead and more income.
I think we'll start seeing in the next couple of years new mediums come up that will more effectively convey news with less bias.
Well, look what they've been doing with native ads. Like they call it native ads, but what they're actually doing is getting somebody's money and then putting in something that looks like an article that's actually an advertisement.
China's
like that to
bad
me
for that.
That's heinous.
China keeps doing that.
That is a perversion of knowledge or literature.
Yeah.
It just drives me mad. But that is a huge problem I find, is that we're okay with this. We're letting it go and letting it slide. We're not offended by it. We should all be like intellectually and personally offended by the way the journals are behaving as companies, but especially the science community, because taxpayers are funding a lot of the research that gets paywalled. You can't accept grant money from donors who get tax rebates and tax relief and then not let taxpayers see your research results. That's BS. Like absolute BS. But anyway, that's just...
Well, it's up to the individual, propensity. And this is why we're advocating for reading, because it is like, we can't rely on the government to, tell us what's right and wrong, because, they're in power at the moment.
Yeah,
and,
thanks to history, we know better.
Yeah. So it's reading enforces the it helps the truth come out, because we all just, if we're all reading the same thing and we all kind of say that's dumb, and everyone's just like, well, actually it's not dumb because we need this guy or that guy in charge, or we need, other stupid ideas that we're being told are the answers to our problems. And if we're reading, we can see the truth for ourselves and speak up in a more effective manner, and then we get rid of these the more people that read and can comprehend and see meaning in the things that they're reading, the less effective this will be and the less they'll try to do it. And so there is an interest at the top to keep you from reading. And if someone tells you not to read a book, you better read that one. It's like, well, maybe not Mein Kampf. I'm saying,
but it helps you understand the other side of the argument, to get the best argument from somebody you disagree with.
I know. Yeah. Like, I've read the Communist Manifesto. I don't agree with it. It gets your blood going if you're a laborer, but
Marx wrote a lot of really interesting, thoughtful prose. Like, he thought deeply about the subject matter, even if I don't agree with it. It's going to be a deeper understanding of a position I don't agree with than I'll ever get on my own because I disagree with it. You know what I mean? The only way to get that, or to be able to fathom some portion of somebody else's abstract conceptualization of reality, is to get it from the horse's mouth, from somebody who's deeply thought about it, right? You can't just discuss Christianity from an agnostic or an atheist perspective, because there's a feeling and a community and a culture behind Christianity, and even that's different between Christians based on their denomination or creed or whatever. So like, you need to get it straight from the horse's mouth in order to actually even get an attempt to grasp how other people feel or react or behave based on the same set of information. I think that sort of leads us to the third major problem that I have, is the training and how to learn, or training people how to learn to read properly, to like evaluate concepts. And the easiest way to describe that is just people's inability, and not just other people, I mean all human beings. Physiologically, we have an incapacity to fathom future prospects as quickly and readily and easily as immediate term prospects. So reading one page a day, you might say, oh, I don't need to read today. And then every day it's, I don't need to read today. I don't need to read today. It's just one day. It's just 15 minutes. Who cares? But over time, that adds up. So when you make these patterns of behaviors, or these routines, or these rituals of productive, progressive self-development, even if it's reading like self-help books or meditation, whatever you choose to pick up and read, if you do it for 5, 10, 15 minutes a day, it is way, way, way more beneficial to you than doing nothing.
This sounds
and
exactly...
people misinterpret that. They think it's only 15 minutes, so whatever, I can skip today.
This sounds exactly like... working out, like just do 5 push-ups a day, and then you're gonna be like, now do 10 push-ups a day, now do another kilometer of running, now do this, and eventually you'll just get used to it and be able to push yourself harder. It's exactly the same thing. Take
and just like
reading out
running,
and put like exercise, and it works the same way.
And it's just like with running too, because if you run for 5 minutes, health-wise, you get a way huger gain from doing nothing to 5 minutes a day than you do from running an hour to an hour and 5 minutes. That extra 5 minutes, once you're already able to jog for an hour straight, does almost nothing. It's imperceivable. In order to get stronger from weightlifting, if you can lift 200 pounds, you need to really push yourself just for a marginal incremental gain after that. But from a baseline of 0, the smallest little bit you do of anything in your life relative to 0 makes the biggest difference you could possibly apply your time and efforts to.
Well, and to be harsh, anyone who says that, well, I can't do that, or I'm dyslexic, or I don't have enough time, I don't have enough, blah, 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 blah. It's like, I don't care. Find a way. I do not care. Everything that you say when you say I can't do it is an excuse. And I'm like, read something. But every time you don't read, it's just an excuse. Oh, I'm blind. There's audiobooks. Get somebody to help you. Like, don't let anything stand in your way. Be as belligerent as you need to. If someone's holding a gun to your head and says you're not allowed to read, because you're in a country that you probably don't even want to live in. So I don't care what your excuse is, do it. And like, I'm sorry if I'm harsh, but it's the same thing with exercise. It's like, oh, I'm tired today. Good. Oh, well, I don't have, I don't have any books because, I'm this. Good. Now you can jog and you can jog to the library, come home and then read. Now you're doing 2 things. That's 4. So, I'm sorry. No excuses.
But speaking as a person who's physically disabled, like, I can vouch for this. Sometimes you just physically can't do something, but you can still sit upright and move your arms maybe. Like, do something. And if you can't read a whole paragraph, read a sentence. Then come back and read the next. And if you can't read a whole sentence, read 2 words. Do something.
I remember being sick
if you do
and
something.
Then being like, calling my wife and being like, bring me a book or something, or like, I can't do anything because I'm sick. Like, I'm suffering from this heart thing right now, and I'm doing light exercise. I'm going for walks. I'm not letting myself just get, inflate because, I can't, I have, I don't want to call it a disability, but situation,
an affliction.
And so I'm doing what I can because I can. And because I realize that whatever I do, even the smallest thing, is better than had I not done anything. And anything I have is an excuse, and it's lame. Like,
and again, literacy can be
my
anything.
grandmother died. Well, that doesn't mean you can't read a book. You don't have to put your life on the hold because, your grandma wouldn't want you to not read.
And if books are impossible, go through an album. Like, start cover to cover, the way the artist intended you to listen, start to finish, everything. Because that's similar to reading in the sense that you get a consistent, well, not in everything you listen to, but if you listen to good music, there will be some type of motif for the album. And listening to it in order front to back, even the songs you don't like, and you listen to the lyrics, and you follow the progression of the chords and the drumming patterns and, all those little schemas that go into the production of a quality album. It's easy to pinpoint them. Like, you can tell the difference between Lil Wayne and Pearl Jam. You know what I mean? Or like Tupac was really, really good at making albums have a theme, because the whole album would be sort of tied towards a singular, a point or a goal or a focal point. Do you know what I mean? Like, they all sort of taper in together, all of the songs and the combination and the order and the length of the tracks and all that. That's a type of literacy in understanding where the artist is expressing something deeper and more meaningful than just superficially picking out a single track or like 2 songs that you like and listening to them on repeat. Because there's only so much you can gain from hearing the same song for the 8th time rather than ever listening to the whole album cover to cover. You'll get a lot more out of listening to a whole album cover to cover 2 or 3 times than repeating for the 9th or 10th that one or 2 songs that you like.
Unless it's still in like unpacking. Poetry does this a lot. Poetry's hard to read. Yeah. If you read something and go, oh, there's something there, and you read it again, and you read it again and again and again. And every time you read it, there's something new there, and you're just like, there's something here. And reading it over and over again will unpack it more. Like, a good music does that. A good movie, like a really good movie, there's not as many of those. Thinking something like, Barry Lyndon or something like that, where you have to watch it twice.
At least, though, there's always something that comes out every year that's just really good.
Yeah. Don't let yourself get cynical with stuff that you read. But on that note, I think I'm pretty much ready to wrap up. If you had any final comments. No, I think I said everything I needed to say.
Reading is good. Do it.
Yeah. Don't just be literate. Actually read. So
thank you for listening to Frivolous Gravitas. You are welcome to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, but we've got obviously an RSS feed for just the audio only versions. You can find us on Google Podcasts, on iTunes, all kinds of other places.
You can call us and say hi. If you have gotten to this part of the audiobook podcast, for comments, Mom. Tell us which book had the greatest effect on your life, and tell us about it, because I always need new reading recommendations. And just put that in the comments, and Maybe I'll have something new to read because I'm always looking for new books.
Yeah, maybe this time we'll try to add some references in the description too. We'll link to some books that we like. Some, what do you call it? A book club thing? What does Oprah do? She's got a book list.
She just makes money. She just sits there and makes money.
Okay, it'll be the Frivolous Gravitas bestsellers list.
The book
So
club.
not things that sell, but things that get read. Best readers list.
Maybe we should just put together a list of books we like.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
I'll be conservative, I promise.
Yeah. We'll see if we can max out the description length. Just like plug it and spam it.
Maybe we'll do something.
Yeah. But thanks for listening.
Yep. And we'll see you guys next time.